Hello there. Today I'm taking a look at a wine from Pomerol. This is Chateau du Domaine de l'Église 2017. My reason for looking at this is that a few days ago I was talking to a friend of mine, a negociant from Bordeaux, and we were discussing the fact that there does seem to be an awful lot of wine available for sale from Bordeaux at the moment. Close on the finish of a second pretty poor Empereur campaign in a row. I think there's awareness that there's plenty of wine from recent vintages available both from the chateau, from the negoce, and that merchants are trying to keep their stocking levels relatively low as well. And hopefully that should produce an environment where there are some really good buys in the market. So I was asking the question, what should people be buying? And he'd suggested that he'd tasted some of the 2017s recently, and that some of those were tasting really good. Very kindly, he sent me some samples to try. So I'd like to thank the negociants Boire Manoux for sending me this sample and giving me the opportunity to try this wine. Chateau du Domaine de l'Église is thought to be the oldest estate on the plateau in Pomerol. The main part of their vineyard is located pretty much in the shadow of the church there, and the estate gets its first historical mention in something called the Vieux Papiers de Libourne, which are dated 1589. At that stage, the estate belonged to the foundation of the Hospitaliers along with the church. And in these early days, rather than being a wine estate, this was almost certainly a hospital for lepers. Now, the estate's described as having been secularised in 1793, so it was sold to private ownership. And the purchasers of the Landard family retained control of it for almost 2 centuries. In 1956, a severe frost hit the plateau in Pomerol, and in fact the devastation of the vines here at Chateau du Domaine de l'Église was such that the entire vineyard needed replanting. This replanting was done, but shortly afterwards the owners entered into a management and sales agreement with the negociants Boire Manoux. Following on from this arrangement, in 1972, a deal was struck with Emile Casteja, the owner of Boire Manoux, to sell him the estate. So in 1973, along with another estate in Landard de Pomerol called Chateau Pignon, Chateau du Domaine de l'Église was sold to the Casteja family, and Emile Casteja put his son Philippe in charge of the estate, and Philippe set about work to improve the estate and its wines. Now, 2017 was by no means the easiest vintage for Bordeaux. But although Pomerol saw some difficulties, there were some quite good wines made. The growing season began reasonably well. Overall, it was slightly warmer than average. January was extremely cold and dry, but a warm spring led to an early bud burst, and these mild conditions continued into April. However, late April saw an extreme frost, not to the extent of 1956 that actually killed vines, but sufficient to kill a lot of the young shoots and the buds, and to severely reduce the yields of fruit that the vines were going to give. Some estates were hit harder than others. In fact, some estates just didn't make a wine in 2017. And certainly yields across Bordeaux were some of the lowest that had been seen for 25 years. Fortunately, a sunny May ensured that those buds that had survived flowered successfully. Good weather continued through June, and there was a combination both of heat spikes but also a certain amount of rainfall to relieve the vines. However, June almost became a month of extremes. There was some blazing heat, but also some quite severe rainstorms. Following this, however, the summer remained dry. However, temperatures remained stubbornly low. Thankfully, because yields were low, the grapes still managed to ripen, and picking went on in good conditions, giving healthy fruit. However, it is a vintage that lacks that sort of high ripeness character, with flavours being in a more of a sort of red fruit sort of style. Pomerol did do better than Saint-Emilion, but I'd be interested to see quite how concentrated this wine is. The vineyards of Domaine de l'Église cover about 7 hectares. They have various parcels of vine located on the plateau, but their main parcel and the best vines all lie within the shadow of the church tower of the church right in the middle of Pomerol. Plantings here are 95% merlot and 5% cabernet franc. Vines are low trained, either to double or single Guillot, as is typical here, And there's a planting density of somewhere in the region of 7,200 vines per hectare. An average vine age is somewhere in the region of 40 years. So the fruit here is coming off mature vines that should naturally give low yields of concentrated fruit anyway. The soils are very typical for the plateau of Pomerol. They're gravels over sandy clay, and that clay has veins of iron running through it. Near neighbours to Domaine de l'Église are Château Clinet and Château l'Église Clinet, with Château Le Gay just across the road and Patrousse not very far away at all. The vineyards here really are right at the heart of the plateau of Pomerol. Now, the winemaking here is done by the same team that make the wine for the Premier Grand Cru Classé from Saint-Emilion, Chateau Trottevieille. The fruit is hand-picked, there's some careful selection goes on. Fermentation takes place with selected yeasts. It goes on in stainless steel tanks. They have 4 quite short 100 hectolitre tanks, and fermentation is temperature controlled. So what they'll be doing there is trying to stop the temperatures from getting too high so as not to extract too harsher tannins from the fruit. Total maceration time in 2017, including maceration after the end of fermentation, lasted about 4 weeks. And aging took place in French oak barriques, so 225 litre French oak barrels, 60% of which were new for the vintage. So that's quite a generous use of new oak. And the wine stayed in those barrels for 18 months. So I'm expecting to find some quite toasty elements in there from the oak. Now, the final blend for the 2017 was pretty much in line with the vineyards. Actually, it's 97% of merlot and 3% of cabernet franc. So let's have a look at the wine, shall we? Now, I decanted this about an hour ago to get some air into it, so I'm hoping this will be showing quite nicely now. Looking at it, it has quite a good depth of colour. It's not quite opaque, but it is quite a deep, dark purple rim. There is still quite a purple note to the colour on the rim there. Swelling it, the wine is labelled as 14% alcohol. I'm not particularly seeing it with any great readiness to throw tears into the glass, which is a little surprising. I expect a bit more density from a Pomerol like this. So let's see what we make of the aromas, shall we? The character really is initially a sort of an earthiness, very typical for Pomerol. Just starting to gain some notes of mushroom and truffle as it's developing. And then behind that, there's some high ripeness notes, some raisin notes. Now it's starting to show tears on the side of the glass. And finally, I knew they'd come eventually, but I'm surprised how long they took to show themselves. So yes, the aromas are quite high tone. I guess the aromas are showing some quite well integrated notes of oak. There's sort of a cedrian note alongside some really quite red, ripe, plummy fruit. And at the end of the aromas, there really is almost a sort of a potpourri of spices with nutmeg, cinnamon, possibly even a hint of ginger, all some sort of sweet spices. But still that quite sort of savoury, earthy note. So let's taste. The palate really has a very savoury dimension. There's earthiness, there's hints of mushrooms and truffle sort of working to show themselves. There are actually some notes of rose petal on the palate, and they're opening, and again those truffle notes are starting to show. There are some high ripeness notes that are heading towards a sort of raisin note. And perhaps also there's a little bit of bitter licorice in there. There's a very impressive silky smooth texture. The wine's at midweight, and the smooth rounded texture has notes of vanilla. There are chocolatey elements. Sitting behind all this, there is some ripe red plum fruit, but there's so much going on at the front of my mouth that I'm actually having to look for that. As the wine's developing in my mouth, I'm seeing more of those truffle notes. There are notes of cocoa, there are hints of vanilla, all starting to develop and showing themselves as layers. I do think it's quite fascinating how this wine's opening up. I guess it's a wine that's sort of at a crossroads in its development. It's about 8 years old. It hasn't fully shed its primary fruit notes and gained all those sort of mushroom, truffle, earthy, chocolatey notes it may have in 4 or 5 years' time. Something I haven't mentioned is actually the wine's got quite good acidity, and that's lifting it and keeping it lively. This isn't a huge wine, it's mid-weight, although the alcohol seems to be giving roundness. It doesn't seem hot or out of balance. The acidity is ensuring there's good length, the finish is lovely and smooth, and increasingly, well, that's why I'm seeing those developed notes as they take over and overwhelm the more primary fruit elements in the wine. I think it's fair to say that Chateau du Domaine de l'Église is an estate that's been on a substantial upward trajectory quality-wise, probably for the last 15 years. I think they're using more new oak, they're working much harder in the vineyard there, and they've achieved the vine age for the estate to really perform. This is by no means the highest scoring vintage of Domaine de l'Église. The Wine Searcher aggregated critic score I note was 90 out of 100. I'd be happy to suggest that maybe the development I'm seeing here has slightly exceeded that level, probably not by a lot. This is a lovely example of a Pomerol. I think it's drinking very nicely now, and I think it looks as if it's going to continue to drink in a more and more evolved, mature style over the next 5 to 10 years very happily. This is not a bad vintage. The question then becomes, how well priced is it in comparison to those other vintages? So I will leave a link for the page for this wine on the Wine Searcher website in the notes below, and you can follow that and particularly look at the vintage section there where you can compare the scores and the price of the vintages and see how you think it stacks up in terms of value for money. Certainly I think it's a very enjoyable wine to be drinking at the moment, and will continue to be as it increasingly evolves over the next few years. So thank you so much for watching. I do hope you found the video of interest. If you have, do please press the like button, that would be great. If you would like to watch more of these videos, do please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and that way also you can set yourself a notification and you can be informed every time I publish a new video. If you have any comments you'd like to leave, please pop those in the comments box below. I would love to hear which vintages you think people should be buying at the moment. Not just in terms of which are the best, but which are offering the greatest value for money. Also, if you have any friends you think might like to watch the video, do feel free to pass it on to them. I'd really appreciate that endorsement from you. So thank you so much for watching. I do hope you'll manage to make some time and come and join me for another tasting in the very near future. Till then, bye for now.